Welcome, everybody. A special welcome for you, Alexander. Just to give a context before I leave the word to you. So this is a 4D conversation. So my name is Geraldo Salles Cavalcanti, and you know what the D stands for?
No.
No? Dreamers, doers, designers, and doubters. And it's a community, and there are many 4D here that we are looking very closely, and our focus is the meta crisis. And the idea that, of course, we have climate change, global warming, this is huge, but we believe that there are many other crises and they are interconnected. And the idea of that community is really to try to understand this big thing, right? Very complex, but also find ways to how we can mitigate that. Our thinking is also, if you go back 20 years when we met, right? So, or a little bit more, we believe that there was a lot of, how to say, save the corals, save the whales, you know, save the forests. And then we understood that, well, this was connected to climate change. So the same thing here. So metacrisis, we believe that's something that we're going to hear more and more. At least it's something that we sense, right? So this is a growing community, and if you like what you hear today, join us. It's a community, so it's free of charge. It's really just a participation, the time you put in. And I think we're doing a lot of exciting things. One of them is the 4D conversations, but also we discuss daily on these issues. So if you like to understand what's going on and have other people that are also concerned, this is really a good place. And then the other place, just so we know, we are here at Klustret. So Klustret at Sheret, that's part of here, at Sheret Foundation. Maybe you want to just say some words, because we also have that.
Yes, again. This says he says that he's a shy or Brazilian. Believe him or not. But okay, I am a Klustret member, and this is Klustret. Klustret is really a community of people. And we have this space where we can work together, but you know, entrepreneurs, and we just share this office together. And we have a shared interest in inner development and in social in societal change. So basically, we believe that to change society, you need to first start with yourself, and develop yourself as a person, and then you can actually have impact in the world. So that's our common interest. But feel free to talk to me if you are interested in Klustret.
And also a co-working space. I mean, it's this beautiful location, right?
Yeah.
And so, Alexander, we met almost to this day 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Yeah. And the longest workshop I remember in my life,
Me too.
7 days. We are closed year 2000 and looking to the year of 2010 and scenarios for Edison. And we are really, really desperate and we need help, so we called you. And so we're very happy to have you here today and talk about something that I think is so important, to understand what China is doing, the ecological vision, right? And so I think this is going to be a very exciting day. One trademark of the 4D conversations is it's not a lecture, okay? So it's a lot of questions, but leave it after your talk. That should take like 40 minutes or so. Something like that. And then there will be plenty of time for discussions afterwards. And if you join the 4D community, which you also join, I hope, we will continue the discussion.
Yeah.
Any questions? No?
Super.
Good.
Thank you so much, Geraldo. And good evening to you, and good evening to you, whoever is online. I'm afraid I won't be looking that much at you guys through the camera. It feels so much more natural to be looking at you. So before I begin, just a few more words about me. So I moved to Sweden about 35 years ago. I spent the first decade as an analyst and consultant trying to help companies, organizations understand what's happening in the world. I was working quite a lot with scenarios, and as Geraldo said, that's where we met. You were at Ericsson at the time, and you were doing a big scenario project I think the story went that 5 years earlier you had done one with McKinsey that had cost I don't know how much, and then 5 years later you received the order to do a scenario process, but no external consultants, which you did. But at the end, for the final workshop, you felt you needed some facilitators. So a colleague of mine and me joined you out for this marathon workshop outside of Stockholm. That was a long time ago, and I'm not going to talk about scenarios for telecoms. So after that, I spent a decade working for an NGO in Stockholm called the Tellberg Foundation, famous for the Tellberg Forum, and I was part of the design and curation and production team of the Tellberg Forum. After that, I'm ending a decade as an independent consultant, working especially with designing and producing events, learning processes, leadership programs, working with think tanks, governments, companies sometimes, and foundations. And I guess one of the things I've been doing a lot is designing what I like to call memorable meetings that matter. And I actually wrote a book about memorable meetings that matter. It's not a book, it's more a handbook about how to do. And it's through my work the last 10 years that I came into contact with China. I've been working for a Scandinavian Chinese foundation called the Aurora Borealis Foundation, which was co-founded by the founder of the Tellberg Foundation before, Bo Ekman, with some Chinese friends. And through that, we've designed a number of gatherings, meetings, conferences, about a dozen or so in China and in the West, and bringing together a strange group of Chinese philanthropists, investors, sustainability pioneers, and sometimes even think tank people and others. And it's through that work that I had the opportunity to start thinking about what the world looks like from a Chinese perspective. And needless to say, it's really quite different. And that's what I want to talk with you about today. And I want to talk to you about something that is called the ecological civilization vision. I think few of us
I think you need to share it properly. For some reason, you're
I am sharing. And
the presentation with.
yeah.
So,
No? Ta-da. It worked perfectly fine 20 minutes ago, as it always does. Oh. Now,
Sharing in Teams doesn't work.
yeah, that's the thing. But why doesn't it work here? What has happened here? Oh, sorry about this. But
I thought we tested it, but
yeah, we did. There we go.
the computer against the Microsoft.
No, sorry, it's not that one.
What's that?
now it's sharing something.
Yeah, but not the right thing. Share.
Now, did this
Now,
Oh, now we share. And the sound.
Ah.
And the sound, you need to share with sound.
Sure.
The sound is sharing as well? No, probably not the sound from here, right?
So you need to share. Share again.
Okay.
Sorry. Right.
Or you, and then I share, and then I include the sound. Now,
Now. Now.
and then we go there.
Oh. Yeah.
So, yes, now we're there. So, China.
Not online. Online, we don't see the main.
You see something else. That's the reason.
We see your screen. We see your screen with
We run it this way. Can you see it in the camera?
we can see it in the camera. Yes.
So we spotlight that one. So don't share. Don't share the presentation. It's fine.
Okay,
So stop sharing. That's the only.
I stop sharing.
And I will do lightning on that.
I already spotlighted it.
Okay, good.
There we go. There and there. Good. Are we okay?
Yes, it will work.
So, China, ecological civilization. Now, when you think about China in 2025, it's more this you think about. So this is actually from Shenzhen, the newest of the new cities. And in the middle of Shenzhen is a huge museum about the history, the new history of Shenzhen. And inside that museum is this 75-meter long LED screen, super HD, the most, it's beautiful, beautiful. And you go out and Shenzhen is this big new city. It's not really ecological civilization, is it? And yet, underneath all of this, there is something that may be brewing, and that's what I want to share with you. And that's this. For those of you who read Chinese, you can see what's written here. I'll come back to that. It says ecological civilization. Before talking about ecology and geopolitics and technology and policy, I think we should begin with language, with words, because words are important. They shape imagination. So the words here are Shen, Tai, Weng, Wen, Ming. And it's not only a label, it's also 4 words, 4 characters that carry a lot of meaning. Chinese, I speak no Chinese, but throughout these years, I've learned that Chinese as a language is 100 times richer than our language when it comes to all the layers of meaning that each character, each word carries with it. And I think it's important to remember that. So that's why I thought I'd begin today with just a little short explanation of what this is. I did it by asking perhaps my best Chinese friend to unpack, that's the word we use. Can you unpack those words for us? And my friend Alice did that, and I'm just going to show a few seconds.
So 4 words. Shen, Tai, 2 words refers to ecological. Wenming refers to civilization. And Shanghai actually are composed of two words. One is Sheng, means life, giving birth, force, it's vitality, it's that. And time means a status. It's a process. Time is a process of evolving.
So Shengtai is the process of something emerging, of life being created. And isn't that word a little kind of different and richer than the word ecology or sustainability? So I think we should bear that in mind when we think about this. Now, this Shengtai Wenming is being translated as ecological civilization. We don't really use the word ecological civilization as our overriding narrative for what's happening in our part of the world. For the past few decades, we've really focused on the word sustainable development. That's been, I'd argue, the kind of guiding vision, the explicit attempt to reconcile growth and planet, or economy or ecology, humanity and the biosphere. And in a way, it rests on an impossible compromise, this kind of attempt to bring two opposing forces together, the forces of economy and the forces of the planet. The development part of the term, back when I was young, we didn't really use the word development that much. The word we used then, you'll remember, was the word progress. We talked about progress. Then sometime during my youth, that word kind of disappeared, and then we started talking about development, and then we start talking much more about growth. And so progress, development, growth, and growth was supposed to be sustainable, is supposed to be sustainable. But growth remained the non-negotiable central objective. Ecology was something external. The same, of course, was true in China. Economic development was pursued and achieved at an incredible speed, and a scale which someone described as pharaonic. It's like the pyramids. It's just at an incredible scale. And why was this? This was in order to achieve the vision of modernization and poverty reduction. The slogan of the 1990s was development is the overriding principle. That was actually the vision that Deng Xiaoping said in a speech in 1992 in Shenzhen on a hill above, just above the museum that we saw where that huge LED screen was. It was above there that he talked in 1992 about China needing to begin the process of modernizing and opening up to the world and beginning what then has turned out to be over 40 years, the most incredible economic growth story that probably you can argue the world has ever seen. Development is the overriding principle. And China compressed what we did over 200 years, 300 years, compressed it into maybe 40. And the results are astounding, of course. Almost 9% growth yearly, every year for 40 years. 800 million people lifted out of poverty, 500 million people moving to cities. There's so many figures you can look at over the last 20, 30 years. And those of you who have traveled to China over this period can relate what it was like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe for some of you, and what it's like today. It's different planets. Over the last, I love trains, over the last 2 decades, China has built, 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail tracks. In Europe, that's 5 times more than what we have in Europe today. And if you look on a map, China is not much bigger than Europe. So all of this, in this context of a very, very fast economic growth, of course, ecology suffers. The environment has suffered here over a long period. the faster the economic growth, the more ecology suffers. And development successes and ecological crises have unfolded side by side and at that same breathtaking speed. I don't know if any of you visited Beijing 20 years ago, 15 years ago. You remember every morning you had the US Embassy had on its website, this was before apps, so you had on the website, you had the daily air quality index, and some days was really, I mean, schools closed, etc., etc. If you went outside of Beijing, the countryside was littered with plastic bags everywhere and garbage. The rivers were turning black, the soils were degraded. So growth at the expense of the planet with serious costs for everything. This, I think, is the context in which the idea of ecological civilization started emerging. So the roots of this emerged in the 1990s. Kind of academic in the beginning in universities. And then when the ecological environmental damage was such that the authorities had to do something about it, they found that it was not enough to deal with all the local problems. You also needed some kind of overriding vision. And that vision became what we now call Shengtai Wenming, ecological civilization. A friend of mine, another Chinese man called Zhou Tao, he works at a think tank called the Chinese Society for Environmental Science. It's like, for Swedes, I like to say that it's like the IVA, Ingenjörsvetenskapsakademin, but for sustainability and ecology. And they have 120,000 members instead of IVA's few hundred. And Zhou Tao, who's number 2 there, has given, I've seen him give a couple of times, a really good presentation on Chinese ecological civilization. And I took a couple of his slides. Here he describes where it comes from, and he relates it back to the 80s and 90s. Then part of the story, part of the narrative, part of the mythology, you could say, is the very central role of President Xi in this, partly because this is China and that's how it's done, but partly also because he does have genuine, solid ecological credentials. Already throughout his career, and even in his youth, nature and ecology played an important role. And he already 20 years ago coined a phrase that is now still very much used, which is the phrase that clear waters and green mountains are treasures beyond mountains of gold and silver. The Chinese is much nicer. The two mountain theory, which you still hear a lot about today. Now, it got a lot of its nourishment from other aspects as well, where it was quickly linked to traditional Chinese culture. It was linked to theory practice, to what's happening on the ground. It was also, and I'll come back to that, woven in together with the evolution of Marxist thought, Chinese Marxist thought. And then it has also been used to be promoted internationally. So under the leadership, during these last 15 years, under the leadership of President Xi, it was first written into the most important document in China, which is the Constitution of the Communist Party. And already in 2012, the vision of ecological civilization was written into the party, into the party constitution at the party congress that year. And then 5-6 years later, it was written into the state constitution, so the government constitution, where the National People's Congress added the line, "The state shall promote the building of an ecological civilization." I want to highlight the fact that it's in these two pillars of Chinese governance. China is governed in this, there's the state and there's the party, and they are very tightly intertwined. And when something is present in both pillars, it really takes it becomes a long-term civilizational orientation and not only a temporary policy initiative. And the party and the government become co-responsible for this. A few years ago, 2 years ago, in 2023, an important white paper was published. So it was published by something called the Tsinghua National Institute for Advanced Policy Studies. That's that, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then also the Center for the Study of Xi Jinping Thought on Ecological Civilization. And it's a hefty document. It's about 85 pages, written by policy wonks, for policy wonks. But it's a remarkable, remarkable document. I have a little English summary of it here, since, of course, it's written in dense, policy wonkish Chinese. And I want to say a few words about what it says. It wants to introduce a dramatic shift from the old model of advance first and clean up later to something new, because the advance first, clean up later model has reached its limits, so that China has to shift towards something else that restores and repairs and regenerates. The diagnosis is clear. Rapid industrialization delivered extraordinary gains, but at huge and systemic ecological costs. I should mention that social costs aren't really mentioned in this, individual costs. That's a topic to think about. We who are working a lot about the social, having a broader take on sustainable development to also include social sustainability, that is absent from at least the official papers. It uses a metaphor as to present its construction of something called the 4 beams and 8 pillars. Sorry, the 8 beams and 4 pillars for how to begin achieving the governance shift that's necessary in this, where the 4 pillars include things like property right systems for natural resources, where you need to clarify ownership and responsibility for land, for water, forests. It includes ecological red line systems, protecting, demarking critical ecological zones, regions, biodiversity hotspots, watersheds, etc. Spatial planning, land control, and performance evaluation and accountability for officials. And here, especially at the provincial and regional level, they are working hard at finding alternative metrics. We are still caught in the GDP only metric. They are trying, at least in the domestic policy arena, to move beyond that. The 8 policy pillars are also interesting, especially for those of us who enjoy reading about policy. It's things like total resource management, conservation systems, compensation pricing systems, transfers between provinces, internalizing ecological costs, environmental law, monitoring, early warning, public participation, institutional reform, etc., etc. And then, of course, a lot of science and technology, a lot of research into clean energy, into modeling, into green innovation, etc., etc. So these areas of policy are really quite a dramatic and very well put together body of work around the how of taking the world's largest economy into another, let's say, operating system. Now, of course, it's not only an ecological orientation, it's very much an industrial one as well, and geopolitical. And China is a manufacturing, exporting, trading nation. It's been a trading nation for many centuries. And the market opportunities of all of this in green technologies were enormous. They were identified 10, 15 years ago in green technologies, solar panels, batteries, electric mobility, the whole supply chain of future energy systems. And as we read about almost every day, we now wake up and discover that they have cornered basically every part of that ecosystem, from when it comes to innovation and patents and products, all the way to raw materials. I should also say that the white paper roots the shift in traditional Chinese culture. Another slide from Zhou Tao talks about this and describes how, well, those of you who've read or been interested a little bit in Chinese culture, it is often described as a kind of a blend of three key components. One is Taoism, one is Confucianism, and one is Buddhism. Taoism talks a lot about harmony between humans and nature, between humans and the universe, you can almost say. Confucianism is between humans, how we arrange our affairs, and talks about the harmony between humans and the need for benevolence and righteousness and integrity. And then Buddhism has much more to do with what you were talking about at Kustvedt, which is inner development. So in a way, these three strands are also represented in the body of work called Ecological Civilization. And it roots this in traditional Chinese, traditional Chinese concepts like harmony, balance, relationality, unity of humans and nature. Triple harmony sometimes is talked about with these three. It's also important to recognize that this body of thought is also very firmly rooted in the ideological framework of Chinese socialism. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, something called Xi Jinping Thought on Socialism with Chinese Characteristics for a New Era. That's a very long name, but that is the overriding ideological guideline of China today. And within that, there is Xi Jinping Thought on Ecological Civilization. It's presented in a book. I think, Anders, when we visited the Chinese embassy a while ago, you were given a copy of this, a translation of this book. So I look forward to hearing your summary of it.
Well, not tonight.
But one has to realize that this thinking is also very much Chinese, in the sense that the party is at the center of everything. On page 3 or 5 of the white paper, it says that the party is the party that will take China into ecological civilization. You can probably argue forever whether is this something that you write because you have to write it, or is this something because you write because you actually believe that's the case. It also draws on Marxist language about exploitation and long-term planning and things like that. Now, I don't remember my Marx from university that much, but I think it's important to say that this isn't really the same as the kind of neo-green Marxism train of thought that's emerging in Europe today. Just a few weeks ago, a Japanese philosopher, Kohei Saito, was just down the street at the RBF house for a lecture on green Marxism. That's not really the same as the Chinese Marxist element or the Marxist thread in ecological civilization. And yes, it does say, the paper does say something about taking this idea out into the world. It frames it more in terms of this could be China's possible contribution to global sustainability. It talks about partnerships. It talks about standards and capacity building. A lot of this doesn't really concern our part of the world. We're far away and we're quite small in the Chinese context. This is primarily destined towards their neighbors and the largest markets in the global south. And ecological civilization as a thread is increasingly present in the Belt and Road body of thought. So much for the theory. I thought I'd take you to a few places in China where I think one can see more practical, more down-to-earth examples of all these wonkish words in the documents. I mentioned earlier that in these, in the history and in the documents, there's quite a lot written and said about ecological restoration. So what do you do with areas that are damaged? And there, I'd like to take us back about, 16 years. And a few of you will probably remember that. At that year, in 2009, at the Telberg Forum, one of the speakers was an Chinese-American documentary filmmaker called John Liu, who had for a decade been documenting something that the rest of the world literally was not aware of. And that was a very, very large-scale ecological restoration project called the Loess Plateau. Now, the Loess Plateau is west of Beijing, northwest of Beijing. It's a big area here. It's very dry, and it has been desertified by mismanaged agriculture over the decades. And that was the prime reason for why several times a year you had enormous dust storms that came onto Beijing. What do you do about that? Well, if you're a pragmatic and a kind of an engineering mind, you say, well, what can we do about this? Let's restore the Loess Plateau. And already in the early 90s, they began this process to turn something like this into something like this. The World Bank helped at the time, but the technology or the solutions were actually picked up from local farmers. And it was, again, at an enormous scale. And in July of 2009, in Telberg, in the main forum tent, at a time when the spirits were fairly low, this was the run-up to Copenhagen climate, and optimism was really nowhere to be seen. When John showed the film and talked about it, there was a very remarkable kind of feeling, gosh, what is going on? Why don't we hear about this? So those of you who were there remember that evening. So just because it says in the white paper that we will also work with ecological regeneration at a large scale, that's not something new. That's not a new technology. This is something that they've been working on for a long time. And the story of the Loess Plateau is also woven into the story of ecological civilization. Let me now take you, well, a little further east to a strange experience I had about a year ago. We visited, together with some friends, the city of Xiong'an. Now, Xiong'an is about an hour south of Beijing, and it is the new city. So if Shenzhen was the big new showcase city of everything that China wanted to be 20, 15 years ago, Xiong'an was supposed to be the new vision city. And it was supposed to embody the principles of ecological civilization. It looks like this. It's beautiful, it's very new, it's empty of people. It's in a marshland, beautiful park where there are very nice, you can take very nice walks. The plan was, or maybe is, to move a lot of the government offices from Beijing to Xiong'an, not the government itself, but the tens or hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats, and turn it into that kind of a new city. Now, we were taken there under the pretext of let's look at China's ecological civilization in practice. I don't have the full picture, but the full photo, but this photo, and here it says Shentai Wenming, Ecological Civilization. This is taken from the entrance of the big museum. This is also a museum of Xiong'an. Chinese are masters at telling the story of what they're doing. Inside here is a big quote with President Xi Jinping saying, in effect, welcome to the city that embodies ecological civilization. And then you see this and you kind of go, this doesn't really feel right. And this, I think, is also, and speaking to some of the architects and designers behind this, they're saying that, yeah, we're trying, but we don't really know. We can't say where we should go. This is one example, but we feel also in ourselves that this isn't really quite right. This isn't how it can. This isn't ecological civilization. This is just another Chinese new city built in concrete and with lots of steel and glass. So this isn't right. A third place I want to take us to is down in the south, far south, down here in Lijiang in Yunnan province. These are the mountains, the foothills of the Himalayas. This is the Himalayas start here. This is Nepal and Tibet. And Lijiang is high up in the mountains. The city itself is at about 2,000 meters high. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. It's not that industrial as one can see. It's not like many other large Chinese city, and it's not that large. It's about 1 million people. And in here, there are various attempts to look for another kind of ecological civilization. About 3 hours outside of Lijiang is this village called Lunagu. It's an old village. There's a lot of potato farming here. We were there in March, April, so it's dry after the winter. And there's a truck with potato seedlings seeds that they're putting in. And in this village, there is a really fascinating experiment in seeing, okay, so how can we, in this context, turn this into an environment that also lives ecological civilization, but not by denying tech, not by trying to go back to the 70s, which is maybe a narrative that in the West sometimes has a bit of traction. In China, it certainly does not have much traction. So there in the middle of this village is this experimental house, or real world lab is the word they use, where they are trying new technologies. This lab is being run by one of the largest, by a architecture and design firm called the Building Research Center in Shenzhen. But this is far from Shenzhen. And here in the middle of the village, they are trying these new technologies. This is I don't remember the specs, but this is a battery electricity storage of huge power. And this is actually a water collecting system that collects not rain, but dew. So in the morning, this will be full with the humidity of the air that somehow has been captured by this machine. And this is another way of trying to realize ecological civilization. So a few notes before I end. I think it's important to realize that at least what I have been hearing is that this isn't a model to impose on the world. China is not exporting this. China exports products, but not narratives, not visions, and definitely not ideologies. So this isn't a imperialistic narrative. And of course, while many in the West we believe that the world would be a better place if everybody adopted our thinking, that if the more democracy spreads and human rights spread, the better the world would be. Maybe not our lifestyles, but that's really not the case for China, that kind of exporting mindset. And of course, they're not very good at soft power. They're not at all as good as the Anglo-Saxon world in soft power. So I think it's important to see this as, from what the Chinese are telling us, this is what we're doing. We hope it's going to work for us, and we've got the full might and power of all our institutions, but we don't know where this is going to end. This is our attempt to come up with a narrative. And this is our way of trying to show a major society that's attempting to articulate a long-term ecological direction that moves away from today's economic system. Now, if we leave China for a second and look around the world, there aren't that many other examples of large visions of an alternative way of life. Either a couple that I've been looking at a bit. One was what the former Pope Francis wrote in his encyclical Laudato Si that was published in 2015, where he talks about the need for an ecological conversion, almost an ecological epiphany, alongside, of course, measures to cut fossil fuels, leave fossil fuels in the ground and move away from a growth and profit-centric world. There's another example that actually an example that could have been, but that wasn't, which is much, much closer to home. Back in the mid-1990s, the Swedish Social Democratic Party had a very well thought through vision that was called the Green People's Home, Gröna Folkhemmet, which Göran Persson used as his platform when he was elected new leader in 1996. And if you go back and read it, it's actually remarkably prescient and talking about green jobs and green industries, and then listing a number of measures that now sound perfectly natural, but at the time you can say we're really quite progressive. Now, 2 years after becoming party chairman, Göran Persson was facing an election, and he and his advisors felt that we're not going to win an election on Gröna Folkhemmet, so we need something else. And then they went for maxtaxa på dagis. So that's an interesting contrast.
But they are not conflict.
No, but it's two different narratives. So those are two examples of grand narratives. So why is this relevant to us? I don't think it's because we want to become Chinese, but it's because China is trying something that at least I think it's worth having a look at and seeing what we can learn from it. So the value lies, I think, in the invitation to look, but then to go back home and to think about, okay, so what does this mean for us? I don't believe in one solution, one global, universal ecological civilization narrative. We have universal problems, we have universal constraints, but I don't think we should look for universal solutions. Each place needs to find its own path. And while a lot of this works quite well in the Chinese context, it doesn't work in a European context. I think, for me at least, the sources of hope, the sources that show a possible direction towards something called ecological civilization, another way of living in our part of the world, that's much more found in intentional communities and eco-villages and bioregional practices and things like that, new forms of collective living. So our version of ecological civilization will not at all resemble China's. And it's, of course, here as there, it's still emerging, still uncertain, still unnamed, and it's full of tensions. Just 2-3 weeks ago at the COP30 in Brazil, China was not on the barricades showing the way forward. They were, according to some reports, actually some of the forces that were trying to pull back. There are even reports that the whole ecological civilization component in many of the key policy documents is actually being a little watered down right now. So we don't know. But what we do know, I think, is that we do need some kind of a grand narrative, some kind of a story that is a little bit in this direction. So I think I'll stop there. And Geraldo, I'm sure you have some questions in your phone, and you have some questions.
We had a lot of discussions in the.
Oh dear, good.
And one was exactly this, that they were very absent, so to say, at COP.
We
Yeah.
had that discussion.
Yeah.
And I share that from what I understood, that they were more joining the oil side, so to speak, in that.
Yeah.
I assume, and I'm just assume if I wouldn't be a Chinese leader, that their economy has been hurting recently, and they are not doing as well as they should.
Yeah.
They have a lot of other challenges. I mean, like population problems, etc. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Just like
Yeah.
they're facing the same thing that we do.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden the most important thing is the price of gasoline.
Yeah.
So
Actually, in the museum there in Xiong'an, there's another big quote from, it's not a quote from Xi Jinping, but it's a quote from policy documents that states very clearly that we're not going to dismantle the old until we have the new in place. And that's one example of that, of course, is that no, they are not rapidly shutting down coal plants. On the contrary,
they're still growing on coal.
they're still growing, at least building more plants, not always burning more coal, but building more plants.
There was some speculations I read that they have reached peak this year or next year, something like that.
So, and of course, for a leader of a country like China, and that's been true forever and ever, and stability is.
And Europe reached its peak somewhere 10 years ago or something like that.
Of coal,
Fossil fuel.
of fossil fuel.
I think so.
Use, I'm not sure. I think
peak was 10 years ago or something like that. So sometimes we feel that we are not doing anything.
That's true.
So sometimes, and this is just a reflection on this, is that we need the good news, because if we feel everything is hopeless, we will not do anything.
But I can swing quite ahead when it comes to hydrogen.
And we have a good option. We have a good starting point.
Yeah, but I think when you look at fossil fuels and carbon emissions, we have to distinguish between what can relatively easily be electrified and the rest of society. And we have some sectors where this is very, very difficult. And it take a long, long time. Green steel, we have been talking about it now since, I remember when I was at SSAB in 2016 and they started this process. So now 9 years later, we are not at the end point. And Sweden produces 5 million tons of steel per year, roughly. The world production is 2,000 million tons of steel. So you can imagine how long time it will take. So I think we sometimes discuss the phase out of fossil fuels in a rather simplistic way. We should look at different sectors. So.
Just one other area that I think you were in the same room a year ago in Beijing when we were talking about the energy system, and you kind of wonder, so is there a vision of a renewable energy system in China? And yes, there is. And they have the advantage that it looks like this. Here in this half, there's a lot of sun and there's a lot of wind. And it is sunny somewhere all the time, and it is blowing somewhere all the time. So here they are installing absolutely huge solar farms and wind farms. Some of the solar farms are of a size, I mean, it's just crazy. I think it's larger than the island of Manhattan. I read it in the New York Times, so that's why they use that metaphor. I wish I had better metaphors. And then, because in the middle here are mountains, so power is produced here, it is sent here, and here there's a lot of hydro, and hydro works very well as a battery because you have the water and then you have the dams, and so here This is kind of the large-scale energy storage, power storage for China, because the electricity then is needed in the coastal cities. So the engineers were given the task probably 10, 15 years ago. Can you come up with an energy system that could work for the country? And engineers do what they do. Several of you are engineers. You solve problems, and you come up with solutions, and that's what they've been doing. No, it's not just like, but again, 25 years ago, the question came up, can we build high-speed rail across China? Yeah, we can do that. We'll find the way. And the engineers delivered that. So again, not unproblematically, but still.
I think now we realize the impact of China. Industrial revolution is apparently, if you know, because I was in 98 with my parents in China, and coming back in 2010 and 2019 as well, and now, like enormous. And the numbers is just outrageous. If you look at this, then the industrial revolution in Europe is like this, and then there's China. In every dimension. It's enormous. And people don't realize this, and they will decide ecology fundamentally. Everything else is just 1%. That's the reality.
There was a talk in IVA, Vetenskapsakademin, the other night. They discussed electrification, solar, electric vehicles, batteries. And Bosse Nordmark said, you won't believe it. There are presently 1,500 different companies producing electric vehicles. 1,500. Most of them will go back to bankrupt, but the ones that survive, they will be fantastically effective. And obviously the best one seems to be BYD, Build Your Dreams. And he said, my prediction is they're going to take over more or less the world. So those are numbers.
But this was the question to the ecological vision, because there's enormous tension there. With this electrical vision, that is quite niche. They're super practical. When you work with Chinese, they work with many, they're super practical solution folks. This is why they solved the whole, when I lived in Beijing, they have all these stand issues.
They have air issues.
Super practical. So basically, they just go out. So they don't really have a vision as such. It's super practically focused.
And
this means in practice as well is that these more like ecological stuff that we will do. They have a very different mindset as such.
And just on that point, I think
it's a byproduct. It's a byproduct. See, locally, we have to work more ecology. It's not priority. It's a spin-off. We're also a spin-off. We will benefit from them, but it's just a byproduct. We will get the byproduct.
Just two quick notes on that. Our friend Joe Tao, in his presentation, he had just kind of, on the way, he just said something that made me kind of surprised me, or he said it in a way that is surprising for our ears. He said, well, China has brought down the cost of solar and batteries. Whereas we say the cost has gone down magically somehow. And he was very clear to say that this is our doing. The second thing I want to say, and I should have said that earlier, is that the group that I've been spending time with, I can't say how representative that is for the whole world, for the whole of China. It's impossible to say. And you meet people, you meet other people, you will always have met other people when they hear slogans and they hear the big things. Some will say, we believe in this, we're going, and others will say, we know there's going to be a new slogan in 2 years or 5 years, so this doesn't really matter, and we keep living our lives.
So we have a question here. Maybe we should look at online now.
Yes, we have. I wait for it.
Wait, I think China is clearly, very heavily in the R&D phase, and the challenge is that it's not just electricity, it's also fuels. And Anders and I were very recently, we were listening to researchers in Beijing from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and they're pinpointing very specific industrial problems. Combustion is needed in many industrial processes, which need liquid or gas fuel. And whereas the companies I'm working with here, they are trying to work on efficiency and reduce emissions. In China, they're looking at crazy things like using concentrated solar power to capture carbon from the atmosphere, mix it together with water in a concentrated reaction, create methanol as a liquid fuel. So they are looking in a very systematic way at all of the areas that need to have new technologies, and I find that very exciting. And the other thing I was going to just comment on is that I've been working in this space now for almost 25 years, and many of the people who are at the forefront of the Western thinking, for example, those working on natural capital, either Pavel Zukdev or Gretchen Daly, they've been backwards and forwards from China for decades, sharing their thinking and their knowledge, visiting and presenting to the party. So China's been learning from the work that we've been doing, and keep on saying to us, we need to learn more. I think
I have a little bit of a almost personal comment on that, because sometimes it's down to individual. We talk about the very simple concept that now everybody embraces, like the quality management system. It was basically a US idea. What professors, academic research in the US, we embraced the quality of all. But nobody listened to him in the US. The economy was booming. They couldn't do it. What did he do? He went to Japan.
to Japan, right?
To Japan. That was Japan. Because remember, Japan was the forefront when they had to rebuild from nothing. And to me, I think you have a point there that it's a little bit personal. If you are not listened to in the Western world, you go somewhere else where somebody listens to you. And people, you're probably right, they come to China. And maybe sometimes people from China are not listening to them, they come here. So I think this is about ideas translating. But I think he hasn't raised his hand, but Kasi had a comment which you partly addressed, but I think you should bring up. So Kasi, you want to put the questions you had on the web for the audience here?
Yeah, basically, I think that sometimes we feel that for this kind of long-term thinking, that it's required in big problems. We are talking about complex problems of the world. Sometimes should we have a different approach to think about them? Because the short-term mission that appears now in European countries, because of our democracy and voting every 4 years or even less. In many countries, we have repeated elections. So is there a fundamental paradox in this need for long-term sustainability with capital letters thinking and short-term mission of our democracies?
That's a very good point. I was listening actually last night to one of this year's Right Livelihood Award laureates, Audrey Tang from Taiwan. And she had a funny one-liner where she's talked about our big friendly neighbor who's constantly telling us that they want to save us and the world from democratic chaos. And yeah, she was saying it tongue in cheek, but this is an issue that we have to, that we can't ignore, and that we need to bring into our context and our conversations, and we can't really put our head in the sand and hope it's going to go away.
We have to find a way to to have a good set of incentives that are longer term than the next election from a politician perspective.
Just complementing there, because I remember in the case of Ericsson, when dealing with China, they have this framework, how to say, development plans for telecoms, for instance. And they basically executed that over many, many years, right? So this that goes beyond one political party, or like I mentioned, this is a long-term thing, learning from the Ericssons, the Nokias, the Alcatels, and so on and so forth. So it's amazing then to look back and see how much they actually done.
It's not a bit like a China is run a bit like a multinational.
Yeah, some of you probably remember.
They run like a multinational.
And
There's long-term and then there's short-term experimentation, and there's this long-term growth, and then it's basically isolated or handshaking.
And then at sometimes there will be directives from above saying, now you have to go out in the world and learn. You remember 15 years ago in Hammarby there were like 5 delegations of urban planners every day that came to look at it. And then sometime 2013, 14, 15, you'll never find it officially written, but you got the sense that then there was a directive from above saying, nope, come home. You've done, now it's time to come home and implement and build what you have learned. And in Shenzhen, we visited a synthetic biology incubator lab, quadruple helix. I mean, you can almost feel the Swedish kind of thinking around, private-public partnerships and incubators and science parks and triple helix that we've been talking about and doing at this scale over 30 years. They did in 3 years or 5 years like this, with an incredible pipeline of innovators coming in, and there was room for 1,000 startups in there, and those that succeeded were then given a place in the industrial park 3 kilometers from their budgets, unlimited budgets for R&D. If you and yeah.
I have another question, if that's okay. This has more to do with the size and scale. What happens when we leave our dear Sweden or Spain or Europe, and you go to the likes of the US, is that you realize that they are way bigger.
Yeah.
So in the case of China, it's the same. I think that I've been only twice, but I got the feeling of this is huge. You have mentioned the example for their energy. Let's produce where no one worries about the solar panels. Let's keep it where we have good batteries with dams, and let's use it where we have the factories and the people. So what can we learn from that scale in our cases where our scale is so smaller, but we perhaps have still the ingenuity that we have from a European perspective?
I think one area, and many of you know this much better than me, is that the pace of innovation is faster in areas where relatively smaller scale, with relatively smaller units, in a relatively more decentralized way. Is it Wright's law or one of those laws of innovation and tech? So that's something to exploit. And the technologies in these, especially in the large, if you look at energy systems and transport systems, that's not where the cutting edge innovation lies. It's much more in other areas, and increasingly now also in the areas of I was talking about synthetic biology and those kinds of areas. And I remember some Chinese astute observer of what's going on in the world kind of saying, well, we don't quite understand why, but you Europeans, you've been living very comfortably the last 15 years and you've been resting on your laurels. And then suddenly now you wake up and you see that, what was it? There's this Australian report on the technologies of the 2050s. I think they identified 39 key technologies for the next decades, and China was a leader in 90% of them. And this goes from drones to optics to you name it. And that's that's something that we're going to have to cope with. And yeah,
very simple is to solve European problems. The fact that US and China can achieve a scale, that's a fact. It's still
because they're good, they're big.
That's a scale.
Yeah.
Ericsson done the same thing by utilizing the rest of the world, and you can scale it out. They were basically commoditized completely, industrialized completely, standardized completely, and you scale it out. That you will never achieve in Europe. You don't have to either. You have to solve European problems, and then you basically make use of China knowledge and competence
and products.
In the future, it's very. There is no alternative, because what you're asking is something that it's not Europe. It's like
Yeah,
Europe is
Yeah,
not that, so
yeah,
it becomes a
yeah.
very strange discussion, I think, as well. You
Yeah.
can solve European problems
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
very practically make use of China competence and what they can scale, because you will never scale
Yeah.
that, because it's completely different.
Yeah.
Same for US. You will never be Silicon Valley, because the type of skill you have as a leading country, you will never get. It's Europe is Africa is Africa, Latin America is Latin America. So it's like it's asking for something that is very weird. It's like saying to China, you've become Sweden.
Yeah.
It's like a stupid
Yeah.
thing to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
The failure of Europe is saying to the rest of the world, you should be like us, completely ignoring reality as reality is.
No, it should be,
Yeah.
Europe should be like Sweden first. You have raised your hand, so I think it's a good time to.
Yeah, you mentioned something in passing which made me think about the GDP and alternative ways of
Yeah.
measuring progress and stuff. Which I think also Cassie's question kind of touched on for me. But I have very limited understanding of China, but my understanding is that they're basically capitalist, even if they have other ways of planning and stuff. And I kind of see a tension between ecology and capitalism. So,
Yep.
you know, in your view, does China have any alternative to capitalism? Because my view would be that, you know, as long as we have capitalism, maybe ecological civilization is unattainable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a huge question, and you know the extent to which the Chinese economic system is based on market capitalism is, I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, but I think my sense is that you get a little blinded if you just look at the label of capitalism. I mean, you need to deconstruct it into some different sides, and China has adopted some of them, but not others. So when it comes to competition, a lot of these absolutely leading industries come from extremely competitive environments, which are somehow top-down, created from the top. There's a lot of competition between cities, between provinces, where they kind of say, okay, go out there and see what you can do on electric vehicles. Yeah, see what you can do on electric vehicles, and then whoa. Yeah. So and then 3-5 years later, some winners will have emerged, and those will be receiving all the benefits of their of winning that competition. In other areas, and especially when it comes to the financial issues, while it is true that enormous wealth has been created in China over these 30-40 years, most of the wealth created hasn't gone into the pocket of private individuals. Yes, you have private individuals who have become, and hedge funds and investors who've become extremely wealthy, but how is China able to finance an energy system like that? So that's because most of the wealth that's been created has somehow been kept by the state, by the government, and then distributed regionally, provincially. And that is not part of the recipe of Western-based or Western market-based capitalism. I think that the key tension, and that's a little bit what I was trying to get at by those short glimpses of Xiong'an on one side and the village in Lijiang in the other. That's a tension that we see, I think, here as well, which is basically is an ecological civilization or a sustainable way of life. You will have people saying, we can achieve that without radically changing the everyday life of many people. So we change the operating system inside. That's what basically almost every political party is saying, every business organization, etc. And then you have those saying that that's just not possible. And in China, I see the same tension. What I would add, though, is that as part of the, let's say, benevolent or the ambition, the central ambition to protect the country, protect citizens, there is enormous investment being done in adaptation, climate adaptation, rebuilding the cities so that they become so-called sponge cities to be able to cope with the torrential rains in southern China. And that is something where there is a lot of work being done. But the question of whether it's a system that is more able or seems to, I don't know, point at another way of arranging an economy to steer us in another direction. I don't quite see it. And as you were saying before, several of you were saying before, on the one hand, we hear a little bit of this. On the other hand, you visit and it's still, more of the same.
But I mean, I know so little about it, but it seems to me that China would be in a better situation than we are in a way, in terms of being able to tweak the system. I mean, even in Ericsson, I think we saw this problem a lot, that we sort of, the creation of telecoms was already done and the system was there and there was no way of changing it. But if you design the world of telecoms today, and it probably goes for a lot of things, you design the system today, maybe you could come up with a much smarter system where the incentives would be slightly different for all players. And I mean, that for me would be something, that would be the way of maybe achieving ecological civilization. But
I have a hand raised in the. I have a hand raised. Okay, so Håkan, you can come in.
Oh yeah, thank you. And thanks, Alexander, for a nice presentation. I think it was a really good choice of theme today, since we have opening up several discussions based on this, and I see mainly two. The first being the storytelling framing of this concept. And I saw the roots actually back to the Soviet era in '84, where they framed or coined the ecological civilization. And then it was by chance picked up by another communist entity being China. And those will, of course, be really important to relate to. And it will, as you very wisely ended off your presentation with, that it's hard to accompany one of those superpowers in the world because you will always upset people. So either you keep a very, very vague story on the high level, and then you make a lot of local adaptations and so on to get something really done. And that's the framing and the storytelling. And the other one is the actual results from an actions taken by China. They have had this EcoCiv discussion for some 20 years. And let's, for example, see how they acted at COP30 now in Brazil, where they more or less teamed up with Russia and
India and Saudi,
otherwise kept a very low profile, while Europe was really pushing. And I can fully understand the phrasing that when people, not Europeans, talk about Europe's role in these meetings, they say, well, Europe has two very, very important roles. Take the blame and pay the bill.
Yeah.
And I think that has been the truth for at least 30 years of COP discussions. And that's not really sustainable if you're going to talk sustainability with all three legs, including the financial part.
Yeah.
So it's more like Europe is watching the superpowers, China and US, fighting it out over battery electric vehicles and batteries and AI and so, but Europe itself is sinking. I mean, we have, as our king actually mentioned, some 6% of the actual emissions, and China has 35 or 40. So China is more than doubled that combined of US and Europe. And they have like 3 times the emissions per capita as Sweden. So it will take a lot of thinking on how to frame and communicate what we want to achieve in this 4D environment. Is it top down, bottom up, or is it some kind of a hybrid? What do you see as a good way going forward in the framing?
Can I compliment with an excellent, because I would just like to compliment something. While Europe is much more vocal and so just like you said, but I think it was last week at the news here in Sweden, Act 12. So there was a debate with the Miljöpartiet talking about how China invests. You know how much of the DNA? 10%. 10%, which apparently is much higher than the European Union, right? So the numbers say something else. So I just want to compliment with this aspect, because one thing is the narrative, the co-ops of the world and so on, and the other thing is the technology.
Yeah. And I think another angle in this is to see how China behaves in the global south. And there have been signs that it's not quite, 10 years ago, and the whole idea behind Belt and Road was basically exporting China's modernization that it had achieved and poverty eradication that it had achieved in 30 years, and telling the global south that we know how to do it. And implicitly, the global north, they don't know how to do it, and they don't want you to grow. They want you to stay where you are. So we can come and we can help you build your airports and your energy systems and your roads and your et cetera. It seems that narrative is no longer exactly the same, that it's not the case as much now as it was 10 years ago, that China is exporting its old model of rapid industrialization and modernization. And that means maybe that we won't have another 2, 3, 4 billion people who are now embarking on the trajectory that China embarked on 30 years ago, which of course would be absolutely catastrophic for the environment. And when it comes to the question of top-down, I remember at one of the meetings last year, Jeffrey Sachs participated, and he was talking about how when it comes to large systems shifts, you need to change the energy system, you need to change the industrial kind of operating system. He was arguing that can't be done bottom up, that has to come from a top down, especially if you have to do it quickly. And the energy system is one such example. There have been really interesting articles written now around how the conflict between China and the US is basically a choice of which energy future you're looking towards. And in the case of today's US, that is a choice of securing as much fossil-based energy as possible, as quickly as possible, because that's the only energy we know today. Whereas China has a longer view and says, well, no, we can't do that. So let's build our own energy system. And it is true that in that fight, Europe is barely, isn't even raising its voice or even thinking about it. But we can talk for a long time.
Been built in China. This was basically their boom. They built stuff, the classic way how the Europe built stuff as well. Then they move now into biotechnology in that area, and as well with basically alternative energy. This is ongoing as well. There will be enormous innovation happening as well. So I think naturally, due to the constraints of fossil fuels, the innovation will happen in different dimensions with AI as well. So there will be, we cannot look back how it was done before, and if we see the next 2 billion, it will be different. With the energy constraints that are there, because that's a hard limit. So the innovation will happen in a completely different area. It will not be basically building more big flats, because that we know basically is not sustainable. Cement is basically, we know is not sustainable. But that's not what Africa is after. If the next 1 billion people just want to have food, energy, protection, very simple, basic stuff. With new technology, you can achieve these things as well. Because before it was oil, my dad is an oil guy. It's very different now.
We have 3 minutes, so I thought we can continue the discussions, but we round up maybe with the final brief questions. Yeah.
Online, maybe.
No, there's no raised hands left.
I was going to say, I don't think it's true that Europe has not been raising its voice. I think we have to look at the multiple dimensions of this green transition and what China is looking at. So Europe has done the Green Deal, and it's been a battle, but enormous amounts of legislation have been designed within the European model for changing the economy, and mainly based on transparency and trying to understand what is the impact throughout the entire value chains. That's been the mindset of Europe, and it's been ongoing for the last decade or more. And the fact that there's a fight now, it's a political problem, that's by the by, because China has been watching, and so has the States. And what happened in the States is that they elected Donald Trump instead, and then there's an ESG backlash enormously. That there's no, we're going back to Milton Friedman. You're not allowed to do all that kind of things. It's woke and it's damaging the country. China's not doing that. They are looking at what Europe is doing in terms of policy, and the white paper is absolutely full of very specific policies that are inspired by, and maybe even just straight up copying Europe. So Europe has a different kind of voice. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I agree. And this deregulatory trend that's ongoing right now, because maybe sometimes Europe has overregulated, it's not the same that you should totally deregulate.
No.
I always said this, that if US hadn't started regulate, every city would be burning down every 5th year. Because it started actually with fire codes. That was the first really important regulation that happened in the US. Before that, every city burned down.
We are on the hour, so we can continue here the discussions. I just want to say this city that just thought it was awful.
You like it?
Gosh, I thought of Brazil. Has anybody been there? I come from Brazil, so I thought, oh, this is then we are talking.
You should go there. You should go there.
So beautiful. Thanks everybody online. You guys coming here to Cluster, so we can continue the discussions, and a big thanks to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. Super insightful. Thank you.